Dynasty. Thanks for coming today. Today we have an amazing guest on our show. He is retired. He actually retired at the age of 40 and just a wealth of knowledge, tons of experience with businesses, and he's a global citizen and a lot of good information today. We're going to get into it with Glenn Robinson.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
All right. So tell us about how you started, I guess, when you're growing up. Were you, what your background is and how you started everything to get to where you're at right now?
Well, you can hear from my accent, I'm Australian. So I'm in a foreign land. I'm originally from Australia. I was actually born in New Zealand, grew up in Australia. My dad is English. And so out of the gate, I had 3 different passports, 3 different nationalities. But I'm not sure if you're aware. So I grew up exceptionally poor. So we grew up in very, very humble circumstances. My dad owned his own business as a laborer. He was a skilled builder, but often it was challenging for him to find regular work. So we never had a lot of money growing up at all. Interestingly, that didn't correlate to not having a fun and enjoyable childhood. That was something that kind of we always found our way into mischief. But normally with a stick and a rock.
Yeah, playing outside in the mud.
Not these guys here in Jupiter where they've got like electric e-bikes and stuff like that. Yeah, none of that was going on when I was a kid. So yeah, so grew up very humbly. My dad, he didn't have much of an education, but was skilled in the trades. And my mum had very, very little education. I think she had 1 or 2 years of high school. So very, very little education. And then I enjoyed school. I did well at it, but to be honest, I tended to get bored at school and got to a bit of trouble just because it wasn't the environment that engaged me. And so I actually dropped out of school. So you're talking to someone who's got no high school certificate, by the way. So never finished high school. Yeah, didn't understand the value of it. In the American equivalent, I got offered a job at a dollar store. So, and they offered to put me on a program for a training management program. My mum was so impressed, completely blown away.
You could become a manager.
Yeah. She was like, your life is made. so she was like, you got to, this is what she was like. So I had zero pushback from my parents about dropping out of high school. They were like, you absolutely should do this. This is amazing. Like, go for it. So I did that. I went and did a training management at the dollar store, and or the equivalent in Australia, and did that for a little while. It went well, but I got to an age, trying to hit the end of my teenage years, where someone would normally graduate high school, and I was a member of a church that had a focus on service, and so at that time I decided to make a decision to spend a couple of years in service of my church. It was an interesting dynamic of kind of a radical change and a mindset of a young man who's kind of was conquering the world as a training manager of the dollar store. And it wasn't until I did that I was around other people that had different life experience, that just had come from different circumstances. And so I met people from other countries. I met people from just other economic backgrounds. And frankly, I'm 20 and this is the first time I've heard of you can go to school after school. I was like, what is this craziness they're talking about? And so that's where I learned about university. And so I just that's what other people were doing at similar sort of age as me that were doing the service work. They were, at the end of it, they were heading back to do tertiary education. And I didn't really understand it, but I understood that like business was interesting. And, there was obviously big business was just inherently attractive to me. And so I came back from that, and I'll build a visual picture for you.
By the way, real quick, where did you serve in your service?
In Perth. So
Perth,
I stayed in
Australia.
in Perth. I think that's one of those ones where they like keep these sort of wild cards close to home. So I left Sydney and they just put me on the other side of Australia. So yeah, that was definitely, I was young and wild. That's the reality of my kind of upbringing. But I came back from that, and ironically, you've got less money when you come back than you have going out, So I came back and I literally slept on a lounge suite of some people I'd known for 3 days before like sleeping the weekend for them. I'm still very good friends with them, but there was an awkward discussion of like, are you going to leave? And I'm like, I got nowhere to go. So I had, during that service, we had professional clothes, but they're old. you're not dressed like a well-tailored suit from London or anything like that. So I got dressed in the best clothes that I had. My friends were talking about tertiary education, so I had enough intelligence to figure out this is the best place to study business in Australia. And so I made an appointment to see the dean of the best business school in Australia, which happened to be in Sydney. Kind of went to that appointment, and the dean sitting is like, "Who are you? Like, how did you get an appointment with me?" so I sat down with him.
Here it is.
Yeah. I presented my I think 2-paragraph resume that basically said I hadn't finished high school and I had spent some time in kind of community service for the last 2 years, none of which is relevant at all to tertiary education. In my ratty suit, that was like barely holding it together. And so I said to the dean, look, I've got some friends that are interested. I can't remember my exact pitch, but it was basically everyone's doing this that I respect. And so I'd like to do this myself. And you're obviously doing something well because you're running the Australia's best business school. So if I could study here, I'd like to. I remember him sort of being like chin on the floor, like, what is going on? Like literally confused. He's like, there's an application. And by the way, I came back from Perth around January and school starts in February. So he's like, there's an application process that started at June last year. like, what are you, like, genuine confusion, right? He's like, why are you here? And I there was something there, and I don't really understand it, but there was something there where he recognized some sort of tenacity. And so his offer to me was like, I can't let you into school. Like, that's just not going to happen. But as a dean, he had elected to choose to teach one subject each semester. And so he's like, look, I do a class. I'll let you into my class, and then we'll have a discussion after that. It was a macroeconomic class. It's quite a fun class. I ended up coming second in the class. And then off the back of that, he goes, you're in. So that's how I started my tertiary education, having dropped out of high school, never gone back, never got my high school certificate. Strangely, I talked my way into tertiary education.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah. So, some people might talk that, he's got a bit of grit, a bit of dumb luck. Like, let's just call it for what it is. Just complete kind of naivete. Just I took the jump without realizing that, that normal people wouldn't have taken that jump. So that was my start into education. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had an accounting lecturer who was super charismatic, which is like, I don't know how those two things came together, but just phenomenal teacher. And I developed a love for just accounting, and I had a natural, I tended to test well and to learn easily. And so I just followed kind of classes he was teaching and then became an accounting major. So, and then in conjunction with that, I actually did a double major. So part in accounting, part in technology, because, the world was exploding with technology at that time. So the web was first coming out and stuff. So that's how I got my kind of start in my education. Then I went from that to, I didn't know what I was doing. I got an offer from Australia's leading bank to go work with them at the bank. I don't know if any of you guys ever worked for a bank, but their job is to kill you and your job is to stay alive.
Right.
So that's how I thought. I was just sleeping in the office. I was working 6 days a week. It was young and exciting, but also, again, like I'm a naive kid from like zero understanding. In my mind, none of this made sense to me. People are like, you're working for the premier bank in Australia. So I don't know if you've heard of it, Macquarie Bank. They do a lot in New York as well.
Okay.
But we were doing merchant banking. They're like, you're working, like, this is the dream. I'm looking around, I'm going, none of this is the dream. I'm like working myself to the bone. Like, my manager doesn't like me. I was like, none of this was exciting. I just didn't like it. I found it toxic. And then I remember the headhunter that kind of reached out to me at school and kind of introduced me to the job and got me the job offer. I called her up and I was like, none of this is exciting. And I could literally feel the switch in her head going, oh, he's not going to make it. Like, she was zero invested in me. She was like, I got my fee. I'm ready for the next one. So I started that. And at that same time, I was also doing my CPA and sort of like cleaning all those things up as well. And then I realized, this is just not the life I want. And so I applied for a job in industry. And so I went into what's now FedEx. And I started, it just was the finance guy, so I just started doing finance stuff there. It was pretty relaxed. I worked my way up into a national role. So I was over all of the international trade within Australia. I was the head of the finance guy of that. There was layers of finance above me, so it was by no means was it a high paying job or anything like that. But they did do a talent scout program, and so within the company on a global level, they were like, we want to find the next 10 leaders of this global organization in 10 years. So we want to find them early and spend 10 years developing them. And so during that time, I put my name in the ring and, following my well-worn strategy of dumb luck. So and then they went through an exceptionally diligent process. So to give you an idea, there was a huge amount of testing that they had, like academic testing, interviews. They obviously you're in the work environment. So they interviewed everyone that worked with me within that process. That it went from thousands and gradually just got less and less and less. And then to the point where they actually flew us, all of I think 20 of us, to the central location in the Netherlands. And they had set up a whole assessment center with a whole bunch of people that were psychologically assessing us from afar, watching us integrate kind of how we operate within a group. They gave us scenarios to play out. There's whole actors. It was a phenomenal thing to go through. I think I was 27 at the time. And I made a few presentations and was one of the ones that was chosen. And so the deal was with that one, which I think is quite smart, that they made with us, is they said, we're going to fully invest in your experience, but we're going to hold your income the same. So for the next 3-4 years, you're going to earn exactly what you're earning now, which was like almost negative. And then we're going to give you 3 or 4 years of like the best experience we can give you. And that's where my career really took off. At that stage, I came out from Australia. My next job was overseeing all of the mergers and acquisitions for the whole of the Asia Pacific. So I was responsible from everything from South Korea right down to New Zealand, and everything from the Pacific all the way across to Pakistan, including India. So it was a huge elevation of what I'd been doing before, and frankly was an over elevation to my capability. It really stretched and tested me. I was newly married. We were moving into a new country. I had no money whatsoever. We literally sold everything we had. There was no use putting it in storage because we didn't know exactly
not
what
worth
we
the
had
money.
stuff to store. We were lucky enough that we generated enough cash doing that to buy a block of land. So we bought a block of land. It's kind of like a land bank, and then started on that adventure. So did multiple different roles for that company. So ultimately ended up running M&A for one of the 3 divisions. And we did slightly differently. So what I would do is I would either acquire or turn around businesses that were underperforming for that business. And then oftentimes we would acquire and not know exactly what we acquired. So have to do a turnaround of the company that we acquired. All transportation.
So logistics, transportation.
It's what's now FedEx International.
Got it.
So anytime you hit a FedEx, they acquired the 4th largest transportation group in the world, which was what I was working with. DHL is the German. It was the Dutch one. So it's called TNT. So TNT was the kind of the brand, which I had all these experiences with. So, and part of this deal as well is they also put me through university. So they paid me to go to, so at that stage I had done undergraduate in accounting. I was a CPA. They put me through an MBA with Duke. So I got to do a program with them, which I couldn't have paid for. So, but basically by this stage, I was like 32. I was experienced, completely broke, had a bit of an education, no student debt. So kind of managed all of those sort of steps in life and got to the stage where, I had all of the kind of qualifications and the education and the experience, but none of the trappings. Ironically, I was getting paid. Again, it was part of a deal and I signed up for it. So there's no hard feelings about this, but I was getting paid less than like 5 levels lower than me in the organization. It was crazy. And then, so then reality kicks in, right? I come off the program and it's like, all right, now we're going to get paid. Like the investment starts to get made. And frankly, the whole world opened up to me at that stage. And so I did a kind of a couple of massive leaps for me as far as my financial journey. So probably the first kind of major one of those was when I went into consulting. So I took all of that understanding, went into professional consulting, became a partner in a consulting firm. There was significant financial benefits for that process. And the big, I wouldn't say it's secret or trick for us, was we had learned to live a certain lifestyle as a married couple for the first part of our lives. And so as we moved around the world and had all of these amazing experiences, our income wasn't changing, so our lifestyle had to stay the same. So the sort of trappings of wealth had all been sort of professionally and decisively put to one side. And so when we did explode financially, we had a conscious decision to maintain that lifestyle. And so we really just started banking huge amounts of capital because we didn't have a need. We didn't have a massive loan on a house or anything like that we were sort of stuck within, or that had elevated along with kind of a parallel plane of our income, because it was a massive step change.
Yeah.
So that was the first sort of step within my wealth creation, and it was what I contributed to was just a discipline of the way we chose to live with our expenses and to be able to build up some capital, which was life-changing capital. This is money that, I was at that stage, I was probably earning in a month what my parents would earn in a year. And so for me to compute it I was outside the cultural reference of being able to compute this amount of money. And then having done that, so I was doing consulting and basically working for private equity firms, helping them to make acquisitions, helping them to turn around businesses that were underperforming. Naive again, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I helping them make all the money? So the next big step within my journey was in my early 30s, was like, well, if I'm doing this for them, why don't I just do it for me? And at that stage, I accumulated just from savings enough capital to be able to at least put something on the table. And so I started looking at kind of businesses that was for sale, and that was in my ecosystem, because I was dealing with private equity businesses that were looking at businesses for sale all the time. I was dealing with banks that were looking for selling things all the time, and I didn't have a lot of money, and so I needed an investment thesis, which sort of coupled with the fact that these were not endlessly deep pockets. They were, as much as we had. And so the investment thesis that we had is that we would buy businesses that were economically constrained. So they were losing money or they were in trouble, and that no one else wanted to buy. So we were buying the ugliest, the worst, the disasters of everything. So the first business I bought had a link to the US. So it had offices. The reason I'm in Florida is because it had offices in West Palm Beach. And so private equity had bought a pharmaceutical company and delisted it from the stock exchange in the UK. And it had an over-the-counter business, which is the stuff you buy without prescription, and it had a prescription business. And the prescription business was just rolling in cash. And the over-the-counter business was complete disaster. They were losing, I think it was something ridiculous, like $2 million a month. It was an insane amount of money. And so I was involved in all the periphery of that particular transaction, and I knew they were trying to get rid of it. And I knew everyone was like, yeah, good luck with this one. And so naively, I'm like, well, this is my entry. So, I love stress. so who doesn't want to buy a business that's losing $2 million a month, right? So I made an offer for them. It was about $1.5 million from memory to buy the business. No one else was buying it. But by the way, the reason I paid money for it is because it had quite a few $1 million worth of inventory. So while it was losing on paper $2 million a month, the reality was if I ran down inventory, I knew I had a runway where I didn't have to burn cash. So I wasn't being completely stupid. In retrospect, I paid way too much for it. So I've done a few deals since that's taught me, like, no, you can negotiate better than that. So we did that transaction, and this had head offices in London, it had offices in West Palm Beach, and had head offices in India. And so the operational thesis was we're going to take out definitely one of these head offices, and the most expensive one was London. So we took that one straight out. We had a US head office and a Indian back office. That's how we streamlined everything up. And the Indian head office is actually in the same building as AIG in Mumbai. So it's a very nice building. And we'd owned this business a week. And the guy who was running India calls me up and he's like, we've got a really big problem here. Turn on the news. And CNN, he'd sent me a CNN India clip, and our building was like flames coming out.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, what in the world? So my wife, by the way, we'd put all of our savings into this. Like, this was all in.
It's all or nothing.
Oh, it was all in. And so I'm like, this is it. We're gone, because the Indian office. So if you can imagine, it was doing all of the back office stuff, all of the management of this particular business was handled out of there. And for a lot of that was revenue generating. So a lot of the revenue generating activity that was being managed by there. So it essentially put a stop to the business, like screaming halt. So Rachel, my wife, she's on the floor in the fetal position, rocking back and forth. She's like, what is going, like, I've lost everything. I should have never married this man. So that business, we literally ran it for a week off the free Wi-Fi at McDonald's in Mumbai. I would just buy everything McDonald's could produce for a week because there was not a negotiation. I was like, I had nothing. We're trying to organize a temporary office and all that sort of stuff as we were doing it. So for a week, we had nowhere to operate from. So we just set the entire team up at this McDonald's and just overtook it. And of course, the owner of McDonald's was like, get out. And so I was like, whatever you can make, I will buy. I just need this thing to keep going. So we ran the business out of there for a week. We finally got it into a temporary office. So we started to settle things down. Had massive disruption on the business. I thought for sure. And by the way, I talked all my friends into giving me their money as well as my money. So all my friends are in on this as well. Something great. I'm going to lose my entire savings. I'm going to go lose everyone else's, my mates. Like, that's the end of everything for me. So, but bit of Jewish good luck. So it was all insured. We had, because of the nature of Indian ownership structures, we couldn't have it as part of one single group. We had to have a dedicated separate ownership for the Indian entity, which was a supplier of services to the US entity, which was insured for business interruption risk. And because it wasn't part of this is total dumb luck, right? Because it wasn't part of the group, then it was classed as a critical supplier that had suffered irreparable damage. And so therefore the insurance paid out like a massive insurance, which was, I think, 10% less than the total value of the business. And so we went through, so we went from a stage of putting everything I had into the business, completely thinking I'd lost it all within
working at McDonald's,
working
at
Wi-Fi
McDonald's,
working at Wi-Fi McDonald's. It takes a little time to process an
Yeah,
insurance claim, but within 7 months, the insurance claim came back. We had stabilized everything, and I was able to return 90% of all the investment to all of myself and my friends. So that
must have been a big sigh of relief.
Oh man, I'm telling you. So that business I still own and is still operating out of West Palm Beach. It's gone great guns now. So that was my introduction into the stress-free life of investing. And that's how basically I kind of started that. And then we just continued this thesis and just grow and build and became more mature. And so we started with a number of investments that were just personal investments. The next one off the gate was this one's a fun one. We bought the Frankfurt buses. So like London buses, we got red buses running around everywhere. So we bought all of those. And the way they work is they're a concession contract. So the city says, if you pay us money, we'll allow you to run buses on these routes and you could collect the fares from those buses. And by the way, if you don't do it according to the SOP, we will fine you. That's the economics. And there was a situation where the Dutch government had bought this concession and it was running at a loss because they were not meeting their SOPs, and so they're paying a bunch of fines. And so the concession revenues weren't covering the fines. And so you can imagine that every second news article in the paper was the Dutch citizens are paying for the German citizens to go to work.
For sure.
Yeah. And so then the Dutch government's like, just sell this thing to anyone. And no one's lining up to take over an onerous contract, right? So they'd failed to sell us things multiple times. So I'd learned from the first time, let's not put too much capital into these things. These things can go south real quick. So at a stage I had a partner, my partner and I, we turned up to the Dutch government. We're like, we'd like to buy this thing for you. They're like, great, we're very happy to sell it. I was like, just before we get going, the purchase price will be negative $19 million or euros. And they were like, So we did a deal with them where they actually agreed. They actually ended up paying us 19.5 million euros to take it from them.
19 or 90?
19, 19.
19, okay.
Yeah, so it's 19.5 million euros for them to pay us, for us to take
just to get out of it.
And our logic was, you're stuck in a contract that you have to pay for. And what we will do is we will eliminate the political risk that you're facing here. We will eliminate all of this noise.
Newspaper.
And what we're going to do is we're going to take that all on us. And you then are insulated from that, but you're going to have to pay us to take that risk. And so they said, yeah, no problem. All right, let's do it. You'd
Really?
be surprised.
Yeah.
So they had to run the buses on time, and then you're dealing with Germany is not America, right? You're dealing with works councils, you're dealing with unions. We had a sickness rate of 20%. To help you understand that, that means that every worker worked 4 days a week. Like, it was crazy. And then, so one of the things we did to, in our Western ideals, we went in there and we were like, oh, this would be easy to solve. We'll give them an incentive to work 5 days a week. So it was costing us that they only worked 4. We knew that they were just taking their entitlement, but they obviously weren't sick. So we said, we'll give you an incentive. And so we rolled out an incentive plan. Everything started coming up good. Then Frankfurt City turns around and says, the SOP says that you can only pay this amount of wages, and you've breached that amount because you're paying them incentive. You need to reduce the incentive. Like, what is going on?
Dang.
So it was crazy. So in the middle of that one, though, so our thought process going in was, we'll minimize our downside. If this goes the worst possible way, we're going to lose nothing. But if we can improve the performance of this business, all that upside will come to us. While we were in that business, everything's in German, so we're translating everything. But we go through the contract in detail, and there's one part of the contract that we had kind of come to our attention, which was there was a cap on the fines that could be applied for failure to meet the SOP. And so we then did a whole bunch of an accounting exercise and realized they had breached that cap, gone past that cap.
Tables have turned.
6 months before we purchased it. So then we turned around to the city of Frankfurt and we're like, oh, look, SOP, which you love, you love a good process. There's a contract. I know you love a good contract. You've had multiple discussions with it now. Actually, turns out you can't finance anymore. And by the way, you actually owe us $2 million or 2 million euros, to which I literally saw steam coming out of a German man's ears. So we then got a bunch of articles in Germany about like these terrible private equity people, and they were very upset with us. But that was the next leap in the kind of the development of kind of our wealth. As by this stage, it was not just me. I had a partner, and it started to be structured as an investment group. So, but we thought we'd make $1 million, 2 million if we were lucky in doing that well. Because of that, we walked out with over 20 million.
Wow.
Over 20 million euros at the start. So we had a cash flowing business, or I had cash flowing business with a couple of my friends that was paying for day to day. And then we had this big hit where we ended up with this huge amount of capital release from this particular investment. And then we went from that to formalizing it further and further and further. And so it ultimately became an investment fund called Valtegra. Valtegra was managed by a GP that was based in London, but the actual LP was out of Luxembourg, and we did that all for kind of complicated tax reasons. But our investment thesis was we would buy businesses that were struggling, and that we would literally darken the skies with financial support. And that was not always capital. More than not, what they really needed was real proper management. And so the way that we delivered that was we had a bunch of finance people that focused more on what's the cash need and the cash focus of these businesses. And oftentimes we noticed that there was two things that were consistent. These businesses were being managed by P&Ls, which have no relation to an EBIT has no relation
Managed by
a profit and loss. So basically everyone was like, they're part of this sort of accounting brainwash, which is like, if I've got a good EBIT, things are going well. You're like, I don't even know what you're smoking here, but the reality is you don't pay your wages with EBIT. And so they were just getting themselves into trouble. And so we brought in a team that would entirely focus on cash, would clean the businesses up from a cash focus, and would completely re-educate the management around that. It was a whole new set of way of thinking and focusing and working as an organization. We weren't successful in every business. So, some of them were too far gone by the time we got them. Or we were overconfident in our ability. Or the reality is, as an investor, you've got a bit of an insight. But the reality is, by the time you open up, you do your diligence, you get into business, further things become known, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I didn't realize this was as tricky as it is. It was a bit of a wake-up call for me as well. So one of my personal realizations is I thought I would have an understanding of which one would be the ones that would do well and which ones were the ones that would struggle. And the reality was I couldn't call that. What I could call was a portfolio that over time had a better chance to do well and not do well. So it was strictly a portfolio play. So yeah, so we did.
So when you say portfolio play, meaning two do great, one doesn't do so well.
100%.
Yeah, adding all
Yeah.
businesses into a
Yeah.
single.
So to give you
portfolio.
some technical language as a business, so we ended up selling this business as a total. So we sold bits and pieces because as a private equity, you churn businesses, but then someone wanted to buy the entire thing. So we ended up selling the entire thing just before my 40th birthday. Anyone that invested within the fund, and there was multiple, like to give you an idea, like Ohio State University, Columbia University, pension, the German Doctors Pension Fund, all invested in the fund. Anyone that invested in the fund made a 71% IRR. What that means that is if they put $1 into the fund each year, they would make 71 cents on that $1. So we had that for multiple years. So obviously 71% interest
That's insane.
is not standard.
Yeah.
So we did exceptionally well. So that worked really, really well. The end result of that was I hit 40. I had more financial resources than I dreamt was even possible to count. And so I found myself in a complete unique situation. I had two partners. One of my partners got sick, and one of my other partners was going to retire. I was the young duck of the organization, and so we ultimately went through an identity crisis, if I'm perfectly frank. So thought it would be great to retire, and to be super honest, that was just a pride thing. It was like 40. Like, who says they retired at 40? Like, so that was a completely a pride thing. It was like, ring that bell. Got to make it known. Really kind of lucky to have that privilege. As a result of that, we bought and renovated a few houses, and I realized I really didn't want to be a GC. That wasn't what I retired for.
Yeah.
So, well, that's not that fun. And then did some travel. I travel a lot doing this sort of work anyway, and then sort of realized that wasn't what was floating my boat as well. There's sort of we have property in London, we have property in Florida, we have property in other places, and we sort of just would swan between all of them. We were able to do that because my wife and I can't have children, and so we didn't have a family in school to consider. And so it was fun for a little while, but we started to realize that true happiness and development as an individual really requires us to put down roots in places, to form friendships, and to have, that's what we really looked for. And so we decided that was going to be Florida. COVID kind of messed that up by a couple of years, but eventually, Florida was the place that we kind of made home. So that's a very, very long way of telling you how I kind of elevated.
fantastic.
So not a problem. So if anyone has a high school certificate, you've got more secondary education than me right now, sitting on this couch.
So that's an incredible story. It just teaches a lot about what's possible.
With a bit of dumb luck.
Well, I'm not going to call it dumb luck. You call it dumb luck, and that's your humility. But honestly, there's got to be a lot of skill and innate intelligence to make that happen, and ability to take a risk and work like crazy to make it all happen.
Yeah, I think if anything, the work like crazy was a big part. That was something that my father, like, we didn't have money, but my father worked hard. He made that clear from a very early age. It was like, we work hard. So, 14, 15-hour days, that was just what I expected. And so, we worked extremely hard in that process. What was interesting for me, which kind of to talk a little bit more about, like, protection of wealth.
Yes.
Is I didn't grow up in an environment where I understood any of the ecosystem that happens around that. What I did grow up with was a value system that didn't like showiness. And so what was probably one of the biggest gifts that I got from my family and the values that I got was wealth protection was almost by default. And my family didn't have anything. So, there was nothing to spend. There was also a value in my family that I picked up at an early age of, like, don't be that showy one. I didn't understand it as a young kid because I didn't have, you didn't yet have the experience of the other side of the coin. But, my parents would talk about, that's a beautiful house, but you don't understand how much that house costs. Or that's a nice car. But, that person, that's all they have is just that car. So they had made comments like that, never in a judgmental way, but it was always just in a learning way. But I had learnt that these things were not of value. That was probably the most important lesson I learned as a kid, was multiple things that we see in this world that just aren't of value, which is kind of ironic because my professional education was how do I value assets. Yeah. So, I spent years and years in school learning how to do that exceptionally well. And so wealth protection fundamentally for me was a result of, we just didn't live the life. We lived well below our means. And so that created the ability to have wealth kind of deployed in different ways. And the other thing that's kind of, and I don't know how your listeners or others kind of how they experience it, but wealth snuck up on me. I enjoyed what I was doing, and I was rewarded financially for doing that well. And so I didn't come out of the gate as a 18-year-old with like, here's my financial plan to protect wealth. Here's how I'm going to diversify my assets. Here's the classes that I like. A lot of that, again, quite frankly, happened out of luck. And I'll give you an example of that. Statistically, the best place to put your money is in the stock market. It's had the longest streak of development over the long term. But in my generation, what the uncomfortable truth is, my generation had a blip within property. As we deregulated finance, particularly globally, then we had a much greater access to debt. So therefore, assets that were safe because they had asset backing were levered harder. And as a result of that, their price went up. So that macroeconomic move that happened across the globe, everywhere where financial regulation was deregulated, everyone followed the same trend of America, Australia, the UK. We all followed the same trend. And so I just naturally started buying property. And to give you a good example, when I sold up everything to go and do my first job, we bought a land bank. From memory, I think it was like 30,000 Australian dollars, like 20 grand US. In a small little village, like, nothing special by anymore. And it wasn't a house, it was just a piece of land. By the time we went to build on that, which was, I think, 3 or 4 years later, so it had gone from 20,000, I got to convert to US, but it was over 300,000 Aussie. So
Wow.
So a tenfold increase, 10x. That was, again, just, sort of dumb luck. Statistically, or even academically, if you're looking at it from an academic perspective, you would have put your money into traditional assets, particularly, pension assets, insurance assets, even just kind of liquid investments within the stock market. But that particular asset class has been a huge winner over my generation. It's normalizing now, by the way. So, for anyone that's 18 watching now, it's not the best place to put your money. Like that ship sailed. But that was an asset class that completely took off in my generation. And so we had the benefit of some of that. Ironically, my ignorance within the space led me to overinvest in some assets that were, bricks and mortar, that kind of took advantage of that wave. As things kind of matured, then our wealth protection went from just like savings to diversification. So, and part of that, ironically, because I lived in London, I had businesses in the US, I had family in Australia, we holidayed in Europe, those assets started to get spread out globally. So bricks and mortar assets obviously are spread out globally, but then also just natural investments from business perspective became globally because I had kind of fingers in multiple pies. I hadn't intended it to be a diversified portfolio, but what naturally occurred was that I started to get geographically diversified exposure to different assets. And so as a result of that, I was diversified from kind of geographical risk. I was diversified from currency risk, and then none of those assets are exactly the same. And so I was also diversified from an industry risk as well. That just naturally emerged. And even just the ability to take not an institutional, but a more firm exposure to US equities. I've got that exposure to Australian equities. I've got that exposure to UK equities market as well. And so as I've kind of moved around and established my kind of location in different geographies, I've also naturally built up that sort of diversification. And it wasn't until kind of into my 40s where I started to understand kind of wealth protection beyond diversification.
How to structure this correctly at this point? Or
Yeah.
were you already structured like legally with trusts and stuff like that? Or
No, this is where
that's where it kind of clicked after that.
Starts to happen. So again, I don't know if some of your listeners are, if they find themselves in, but this sort of stuff it snuck up on me. I didn't come from a family that my father couldn't spell trust. So, forget trying to organize, he didn't understand any of that at all. And so for me, as my education and understanding of this was starting to develop, the wealth was starting to develop at the same time. And so there was not a foundational layer of this is how we're going to structure it. And so there's been some inflection points, sometimes quite financially painful inflection points of correcting that. And then the other part of that is because we can't have children, there's a different dynamic, because it's more like my wife and I, and less pressure about generational protection and generational wealth. So, but still nonetheless, a need to be smart about how we do things and what we do. So a lot of those were developed more in my 40s as sort of the wealth was already there. And because of that, a lot of the trust management, a lot of the thinking around domiciles and where these things hit, a lot of that happened in retrospect. And so because of that, there's a financial cost for it. Sometimes there's a decision on where we would domicile or live ourselves. Some interesting discussions that happen around that as well. If I could do it in retrospect, it would be wise and smart to lay down a few dollars as these things started and to build that foundation to build off. Then would be, if I had children, that would be what I would be recommending them to do. In fact, I would be funding that for them because corrections were material.
Yeah.
The correction had the impact of could have easily bought someone a house, had I not had to do the correction. I put it in the bucket of, I grew up with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm well ahead of where I thought I was going to be. All right, I made some mistakes that cost me a house,
right?
Yeah, or 2 or 3. Fine. If I was doing it with, if I had the privilege now of having kind of been more middle class growing up, having that experience, I would really want to instill those lessons into my children, and that would be the path that I would be going down. The biggest thing that I got from my parents was an understanding of a value system that really established me for life. But particularly those within a middle class, there's enough assets for them to be able to not just give children value sets, but also give them a leg up with structure and understanding as well. But coming out of the gate, that would have been phenomenal for me.
So people starting businesses, people that are beginning to develop wealth, begin to protect it right away before it's even wealth. You set the structures up ahead of time so that you don't suffer some of these corrections like you're talking about.
I think the trap that people fall into here is that they let good become the enemy of perfect. And so they look for the perfect structure. And the reality is you can get 99% of the benefit by just doing a couple of basic things, like trust management and setting the structures up early first. So rather than starting a business and owning it in your own name, spend an extra, literally $100, put it in a trust. Okay, we might need to go back and redo some of the language around the trust management. We might need to, but you've set the fundamentals up. Don't let a perfect tax strategy stop you from doing a good tax strategy or frankly, a good wealth protection strategy. That would be my strong recommendation. And spending literally a couple $100 spend, like it's tiny amount of money, can save you hugely. And those things can go through corrections as well, but just the financial impact of those corrections are significantly smaller than a restart. That would be, if I was sitting down with my son or daughter right now, that would very much be where my discussions would be. Like, all right, and I'd literally be like, I'm going to help you set this up, and just working them through that. And it's not even a large financial outlay. It's just putting in some, and understanding that some of what I'm putting in is not going to be fit for use in 10 years' time, but the fundamental architecture will serve its purpose and be able to be adjusted.
So this has been an amazing chat, and we thank you so much for coming and doing this with us. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Mark's probably picked up a couple of pointers.
Tons of stuff. Yeah. It's tons.
Who's the dean? You were like, I want to talk to a dean as well. What sort of clown made that happen? So maybe for the last 5 minutes, do you mind if I just talk about sort of what's happened in the elevation of my thinking?
Sure, please.
So now I'm entering a period of my life where I'm starting to think about not just how I've diversified and what sort of maturity around products that I use within that process. It really looks at what's my next step with this? And I'm yet to find anyone that can take their wealth after they've passed away. So if they need to reach out to me. So there needs to be a plan for what happens next. And I've found that mature discussions around that are the key next step in that evolution of kind of financial literacy. Now, it's slightly different for us because my wife and I, we can't have children. So intergenerational wealth is a slightly less pressing topic for us. But nonetheless, there's an opportunity to leave a mark. And so thinking through how to leave that mark effectively, there's a number of sophisticated but yet quite available financial instruments that do that well. An insurance market is one that I feel is massively understood. The education in this to the general public needs to be far greater. And these are particular assets that we have exposure to that help us to do things like leave endowments, that to make significant impact to activities that will have impacts on children in grants, have other activities in it that we are involved in that look at orphans and orphanages. And the reality is there's intelligent tools to do that well. And some of the most mature, the most developed tools that we use and I find that are productive are the ones around insurance tools. And the challenge is the general public that I kind of, my family, when they think of insurance, they're not middle class, by the way. So, but when my family think of insurance, they just think, oh, that's in case my car gets into an accident. They don't understand that life insurance has a whole aspect to it that enables wealth protection, wealth transfer that can be used intelligently, intergenerational, but also kind of in the event of what happens next with, when you pass away, I just kind of say a downer on the back end of it, but your ability to leave a mark financially is enhanced by the use of some of those
magnified
tools.
by it.
It's magnified, yeah. And that's the sort of the evolution of where we've gone through. There's been some missteps within it. And also, I want to give the same advice that I did with the other ones, is that you can for sure go through a process of like one step to the next step to the next step and sort of have a kind of a very hierarchical view of the use of these instruments. The reality is, and this is a really important, particularly for people that have children, the compounding aspect of capital is probably the most least understood by humans. For some reason, we have a innate ability to understand interest and how it works over time. And so if you're a young family having kids now, a very small discussion on insurance assets and wealth transfer has the same limited financial cost now, but because of the compounding effects of that, can have serious impacts on the way that you make an impact on intergenerational wealth.
Yeah.
So my recommendation to my own self had been, younger, is that these tools and these discussions with very little financial impact are better had early on in the game. And as a parent, it's great to have those with it. Like, transfer that knowledge to your children and have discussions around these particular things early, because the compounding nature of capital, people don't appreciate the significant impact that has. Over 10 years, it can be big, but over 40 years, 50 years, it's monstrous. And, that's
over 150 years.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the type of thing that you can think about, and a good inflection point for that. My advice for that is, you have a baby. All right, let's have a discussion around insurance asset for that baby. And then you can have inflection points around that. So again, that's the sort of thing that I, in retrospect, would have given myself recommendations for. And look, again, my family was an amazing family. I had a great childhood. I really love what they instilled in with me, but they didn't have the experience or the understanding to have these discussions. No, this was a different universe to them.
Yeah.
But to be frank, they also, it would have been difficult, but they could have scrounged together a couple $100, and for some of my sisters, that's life-changing money that they would have had access to in their 20s and 30s. And so there was a complete availability to them that they just lacked awareness of. And fundamentally, it's not just the awareness of the product, it's awareness of the impact of the product. Yeah. And so we're now looking at that in having, 40 years have gone by, and are now using those tools to transfer and make our mark, with an understanding that this could have been exponentially more impactful had we started that earlier, with not a massive financial commitment.
Thank you. That's probably the best explanation I've ever heard of the value of life insurance. Honestly, it's the best explanation I've ever heard, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Anything else, Mark?
Man, that has been crazy. Yeah, this is gonna be crazy. Wow, that's just wisdom from the start to the end, and you're so blessed. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. That was an amazing experience.
Of course. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you, all the listeners from Wealth Dynasty. We appreciate your attention to this. This is a great episode, and it's worth listening to every minute of it.